Hello friends, welcome to Pour Over Books. I have my coffee, I have my books. Let's talk about what I read in January. I will be going through my 14 January books in the order of worst to best. On the bottom, worst book I read in all of January is Forestfall by Lyndall, Clipstone. I should not have picked this one up. This is the second book of a series called The House at the Edge of the Lake. The first book is Lake's Edge, and I mostly just picked it up because it was supposed to be like a gothic romance, like she falls in love with a monster, and I love a good monster romance. I didn't particularly like the first one, and I very much did not like the second one, so I shouldn't have picked it up. It was very young, it was very annoying. The plot was all over the place. They would walk to a place and then nothing would happen, and then they would walk back and then nothing would happen, and then they would walk to another place, and it was just like a continuous repetition of like events that were uninteresting. I read it because the first one we're sort of introduced to like two love interests, and I really like the second love interest, and I was hoping it would be like Hades Persephone kind of thing, and it was so disappointing because he was more in the second book, and I'm grateful that he was more in the second book because he's the reason why this book is getting a 0.5. If he did not have as much of a role in this book, this would be like a 1 star. Bad time. I did not enjoy it. My second least favorite is Carmilla by Sheridan Fanu. This one got a 2.5, and I don't know why I didn't like it, because it has all the things I like, you know? Like, it's a gothic classic. I read it as a newsletter form. I did Carmilla weekly, so every week I got like a chapter, and then I stopped sort of reading the emails at some point in November, December, and then I ended up rushing through it to finish it now in January, and this was so boring. It felt like there was no point. Like, I vaguely knew the story. I vaguely knew that there was gonna be like a queer romance and a vampire. But I didn't care for any of the characters. It didn't seem like it had anything else going on for it, and I just did not enjoy this book. I thought it was boring. With also 2.5 star, it's The Restless Dark by Erica Waters. This is a YA contemporary horror. Has a really interesting setup of all these characters meeting at like a true crime camp where they're supposed to look for the bones of a serial killer, which is interesting. And he talked about how true crime can very often be exploitative and how true crime can be very hurtful, but also it was a lot of true crime listeners use it to face the things that they're afraid of, and it had very nuanced views on true crime, which I enjoyed. One of the characters, Lucy, is the last victim of the killer that they're looking for the bones for, and she's looking for the bones because she wants to prove to herself that the killer is actually dead so she can stop being afraid, which is, once again, interesting, good. And then there is another POV character who is afraid that she is evil, and she thinks she might be made of the same kind as the serial killer. It did not surprise me in any way. It did not give me anything that I was really interested in. I wanted to know where the story was going, if there was gonna be a twist. When there was a twist, I sort of already called it. So it was just nothing new to tell me. It is a YA, so that's on me for picking it up. But all of the concepts are so good, and then the execution falls flat for me. Which is a little bit the case for the next book, Rin Chupeco's The Sacrifice. I really like Rin Chupeco's writing. I read The Bone Witch a few years ago. Loved it. Loved the entire trilogy. I thought it was so much fun. So as soon as I saw this one, I was like, I'm gonna pick it up. Really want to read more of Rin Chupeco's writing. And this one was okay. I think, if I was younger, I would have enjoyed it a lot more. I think if I hadn't read as much horror as I have, I would have found it more interesting. Because the horror concepts were cool, but it just, didn't spook me as much. I love the main character. He was really fun. I love the concept. Basically, haunted island. All the locals are telling people to stay away from the island because it's cursed and people have died. Hollywood producers want to make a show, and so they come in and take over the island. And then it talks about colonialism and whiteness and racism. And it was interesting but I also found it the plot itself was underwhelming. It could also have been edited a lot more, because there was a lot of names, there was a lot of confusion, I couldn't really tell what characters there were, and there were some mistakes and some holes that I noticed. This was a 3-star. I think someone else could very much have enjoyed it. It just wasn't for me. And that's fine. At a 3.5, In Deeper Waters by F.T. Lukens. This is a YA fantasy romance. Follow a prince on his first journey outside the kingdom. He has magic, but magic is very much frowned upon, because our main character's grandfather almost destroyed the entire world with his magic, and so it's there's some political intrigue, there's some identity struggles, and who am I and where do I belong in this world, and then there is a mysterious boy who keeps appearing. And the romance was cute, the finding yourself was cute, this was very queer norm, I love a good queer norm book, but in the end the characters were just too young for me, and this was just a little not my vibe. Another book that was not for me, but I think someone else would really enjoy it, and Unkindness of Ghosts by River Solomon. This is an adult sci-fi, very intense. It talks about slavery and racism and violence, queerphobia and assault and all those very heavy, hard-hitting topics. It's about a ship called Matilda that left Earth 300 years ago or something after some form of apocalypse, and then on the spaceship they have recreated slavery where white people do whatever they want and people of color are forced to work in horrible conditions. And so it was very intense. I'm struggling a lot with thinking of what to say of it, because I realized as I was reading this that I don't read a lot of sci-fi. I really struggle with reading sci-fi because sci-fi world building gets so easily confusing for me. Every time I pick up a sci-fi book, I sort of have to stop after 3 chapters because I just can't do it. It's just not immersive enough for me. I don't know what it is. So I was already struggling with this book. I was really struggling with this book. I love the characters. I love the main character Aster, who is a queer person with autism. I loved the love interest Theo. I loved how the other side characters were also traumatized and dealt with mental illness and the societal trauma in so many different ways. The cast was engaging and deep and colorful, and the characters were fantastic. So well written. The pacing was off and the plot was off, and I struggled with both of those things because I struggled with the world building, and so it's just not a book for me, which is so sad because I really wanted to like this. River Solomon is an incredible author. The prose was beautiful. There were literal paragraphs that made me tear up because some of the character-driven prose was just so on point and beautiful. And then there would be a world building or a plot scene, and I would be just lost. I didn't know where anything was. I couldn't catch a hold of anything basically. So it just felt very disembodied and floaty. So I gave this one a 3.5. Someone who reads sci-fi would probably love this book. It just wasn't for me. Another 3.5 stars is Into the Riverlands by Nghi. This is the 3rd book in the series, the Singing Hills cycle. You follow the cleric Chi, who journeys around and collects stories, which is such a fun, cool concept. I love the world. I love the fantasy vibes, how you're not really getting full exposition or world building. You're just sort of getting snippets, and it's very slice of life, but fantasy. This one didn't hit as well for me as the first 2 books in the series did. It just didn't hit me as emotionally as the other ones. It has some really fun takes on the different people tell the same story differently, and whose side of the story is more correct, which was fun, and I enjoyed the story. If you like short fantasy novellas, read this series. I revisited some childhood memories, and I read Moomin Winter by Tove Jansson. It's a graphic novel. I gave it a 4-star. I love Moomin. I grew up with Moomin. I remember reading a lot of the comics. They were literally printed in the newspapers, and I would just read the comics every day. Yeah, this was fun. This was cute. 4 stars. I read A True Crime Story by Joseph Knox. This is an adult contemporary thriller, and I thought it was a true story for the first few chapters. It's called True Crime Story. I was listening to it on audiobook with my wife, and I didn't know it was a novel. I just didn't know it was a novel. I thought it was a true story. The book itself consists of emails between two authors and interviews that one of the authors has done with all the people that were involved in the case. It's basically a cold case of the disappearance of a girl, and then this author is trying to unravel it and is emailing this other author, this Joseph Knox. The book even starts with like a publisher's note where they're like, oh yeah, we're republishing this book to include some notes and these things and these things. So it's like, it feels very real, and the interviews are all... Oh, Cassia. If you hear any sounds, my cat is eating. And the interviews are all done by different actors, and the sound quality varies, and like, so they feel like real interviews that have been done in different rooms with different people, and so I thought it was a true story. I was like, wow, I can't believe this happened, wow. And then I stopped as we were listening to it. I turned to my wife and I'm like, this is very like, this feels very exploitative, because the way they're talking about this missing, probably dead girl is like sort of horrifying. Like, the way they're dealing with this is horrible. I can't believe that they would talk about a true story this way. And then for Hugo had to turn to me and be like, babe, this is a novel. Anyways, this was a really good book. Very believable, very dramatic, a lot of twists and turns. I love this kind of like interview-based storytelling, because then you're like, oh, this person is lying. Oh, this person's version of the story is very different, and it was just like really fun to listen to. If you can, listen to the audiobook. 4.5 stars. I read Emily Riddle's The Big Melt, which was a beautiful, beautiful poetry book about being Indigenous and Indigenous life, and it was just fantastic. I love this book. I can't wait to get a physical copy of it, and just like gorgeous. By Way of Sorrow by Robyn Gigl was my favorite thriller that I read this month. Oh baby, come on. Oh baby. You're... Oh, ow, bite. Are you... Like that? Okay. My favorite thriller that I read this month is an adult contemporary thriller about a trans woman who is an attorney and... Oh, goodbye. And she gets involved in a case about another trans woman who is about to be sentenced for killing the son of a senator or something. I don't know, some important US man. And then it's up to Aaron, our main character, to solve the case. And this was so much fun. It was written in, like, it was published in like 2008. So I'm surprised that I haven't heard about it before. Because it's not very common to find queer thrillers. It's not a very common thing, especially it wasn't. I think it's becoming more and more common. But this one was a delight to read. I really enjoyed it. Content warning for, obviously, transphobia and violence. It does have some gross and shitty things going on. Erin gets treated horribly by a lot of people because she is trans. There's a lot of just shitty things happening to her. But she's also, like, surrounded by people who really love her and appreciate her. And get 2 notes. One, it's written a little bit like it's an introductory trans book. Like, there are a lot of times where a character will say something and Erin will be like, actually, you shouldn't say that. And so it feels like it's trying to educate the audience, which is good. For some people, it might be a little, like, grating because some of us just know these things already. But it felt very much like it was written as an introductory book to an audience who don't read a lot of queer and trans novels. 2, they tried to treat the fact that Charisse, who was on trial for murdering the guy, they tried to treat the fact that she was trans as like some sort of plot twist, but they'd already revealed in like the first chapter that she was a woman, so it was like sort of, that didn't fully work. But I really like this book. 4.5 stars. I'm gonna read the second one as soon as I can. Yeah. Next up, another trans book, The Story of Silence by Alex Myers. This is an adult historical fiction that is a reimagining, rewritten version of a like medieval text about a non-binary knight. How could I not read this? It's about Silence, who is assigned female at birth, but raised as a boy, so their dad can keep his title, basically. And then it's about Silence trying to figure out what it means to be both man and woman. And I adored this book. It was so much fun. It was so alive. I loved Silence's musings about gender and about bioessentialism, and it was just like a gem to read. There were things that I didn't love, and specifically at the end, there was some like proving your biological sex by undressing and like pulling clothes off people that was a little gross and like unnecessary. And then the ending of the book, which is not fun because it's a silence tells the story to a bard, and then the bard is the writer of the story, and so the bard really misunderstands like the point of silence story. But I think that's a commentary, and Alex Myers is really trusting us as the audience to sort of recognize when things are shitty. So 5 stars. I love this book. Another 5 stars is Me, Moth by Amber McBride. This is a gorgeous poetry book that, oh my god, this is a narrative poetry book. I really like narrative poetry. I love how, especially modern narrative poetry, tells stories through like such minimalistic forms, if that makes sense. Like, we only get told scenes and descriptions and emotions, but we can still sort of parse together this entire massive narrative. This one was absolutely beautiful. The main character, Moth, is the only survivor of a car crash that killed her entire family, and she is not having a good time with anything in her life. She feels isolated and alone and ignored. And so when she meets a boy who actually like sees her, the two of them leave on a road trip together. And it's gorgeous. It talks about hoodoo, it talks about indigenous beliefs, it talks about sort of the stories of these two religions, and it was just beautiful. It was absolutely gorgeous. It's a love story, but it's also like a life story, and it broke my heart. It broke my heart. Good job. And then top of the list, the best book I read in all of January was Babel. Or Babel. I don't know how you pronounce it. I keep hearing 50-50. But Babel by R.F. Kuang. Immediate 5 stars. This was so good. This is an adult fantasy that has language as magic, colonialism, and found family, but also like tragedy. There is nothing about this book that I didn't love. Ugh, this book is so good. If you haven't read it already, you possibly will, or you've seen a lot of people gush about it, but this was just like so good. One of my favorite things about it was definitely the magic and watching them trace languages and words, because I'm also bilingual, so like that was very just like fun, but also it made me cry and it broke my heart, and it was just like so good and so important. That's all the books that I read in January. Have you read any of them? Do you have any thoughts on any of them? Do you have any questions about any of them? I also post a lot of reviews over on Storygraph, so you can follow me on Storygraph if you want. And you can also follow me on Instagram to see more of my thoughts and opinions and feelings. There's like 40 of you now. I have like 40 subscribers now, which is wild. I never thought that I would get here. I know it's not a big amount, but it feels very big to me. And I'm just delighted to be able to share things and see you guys interact and have a chance at that community. So thank you so much for being here. I love you. Take care of yourselves out there. And I can't wait to see you again soon. Bye.